Broken vows in silver light. My name is Cameron, and I never thought a promise could feel so heavy. I remember the hush that settled over us that evening, like a slow breath before everything changed. I was pacing the living room, fingers brushing against the edge of our wedding invitation, the paper still crisp in my palm. I felt this odd flutter in my chest, half thrill, half dread, as if I knew something was off but I couldn't, or wouldn't, say what. I sank onto the couch, legs trembling, and stared at the photo of us smiling under fairy lights. My throat went dry. I kept thinking, this isn't real. We're fine. But my heart thudded louder than logic. A few weeks before, she'd started staying late at work for a new project, and I'd nodded, even offered to pick up takeout. I thought I was being supportive. But support began to feel like waiting for her heels to click in the hallway, waiting for her laugh to fill our empty rooms. I'd find her phone face down, screen dark, like it was hiding something. My palms would sweat. I'd stand there, staring until she came home, apologetic, soft, love yous, on her lips. Each time, I swallowed the knot in my chest and forced a smile. That night, I heard a message ping before midnight. I froze. The ringtone was hers, I'd changed it for her birthday. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. The message preview said, "Can't wait to see you again." And I knew I wasn't the one she meant. My chest tightened, like someone had wrapped an iron band around it. I pressed open, and my vision went blurry when I saw her name next to his. Simple words, but poison in every letter. I sat there, phone burning against my palm. My jaw locked. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts, and my fingers curled into fists until the nails dug into my skin. I wanted to delete it, to pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't look away. My mind spun, she'd promised me forever. Our vows were supposed to be unbreakable. I felt a rush of denial, a fierce need to believe there was an explanation, like some cruel misunderstanding. But every rational thought was a whisper drowned by a pounding in my temples. I stood, nearly dropping the phone, and stumbled toward our bedroom. Her perfume still lingered on the pillow, one of those little luxuries I'd never admit I loved. I pressed the screen of my phone against my heart, as if I could burn the message away. She appeared in the doorway, mascara smudged under her eyes, looking both startled and guilty. My knees went weak. I could feel tears pooling, but I forced them back. I had to stay steady. I had to see this through. She tried to explain, her voice was trembly, like she wasn't just crying, but breaking. She said it was nothing, that she'd been feeling lonely, that it meant nothing, that she loved me. Her eyes were glassy, and she reached out, hand quivering. My stomach clenched. Part of me wanted to crumble, to let her hold me and cry. But another part, something sharp and cold, took over. I pulled away. My heart felt hollow, a room emptied of warmth. I realized I couldn't forgive her, not like this. I left the room without a word. My shoes felt heavy when I slipped them on, like I was dragging chains. I walked away from our home, our dreams, under that same silver light she'd always loved. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed space, distance, air to think. My phone buzzed again, a photo of them together, smiling, arms entwined. Guilt flared in my chest, but it was swiftly replaced by something darker. I pressed view, and watched as everything fell apart. I felt a low, cold rage, like ice spreading through my veins. I could taste it, metallic, bitter. My hands shook so badly I had to wrap them in my jacket sleeves. I knew, in that instant, that nothing would ever be the same. I would make her feel this fracture too. I would show her that betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. My breath was ragged as I slid against the wall, head spinning, and I whispered, "You'll see." I didn't know how yet, but I promised myself, in that moment, I'd have my revenge. He's standing by the edge of the dock, water lapping beneath his shoes, and the cool breeze feels almost like a welcome reprieve from the heat inside his chest. I can't tell if the shaking in my hands is from the wind or from the memory of that message pinging back home. I tuck my phone deeper into my pocket, pressed against my thigh so I don't have to see her name lighting up the screen. Every time I try to think, really think, my mind just loops back to those words. Can't wait to see you again. All I feel is this low hum of rage coiling tighter, like poison. I lean forward and rest my elbows on the railing, chin against knuckles, breath misting out in quick little clouds. My jaw is so tight it hurts to swallow. I taste metal, bitter and sharp, like every ounce of trust has bled out of me. And yet, it's tangled with something else, a hollow ache that threatens to topple me if I let it. I close my eyes. If I let myself, I'd cry. I'd collapse, sobbing until there was nothing left but raw shame. But I flick that thought away, like a stone skipping across the surface. I need focus. I can't just storm in, accuse her head on. I know her too well, she'll charm her way out of it, tear-jerking apologies, tears streaming so convincingly that I'd be the monster for doubting her. No. I need leverage. I need her to feel the pulse of dread I carry. So I start paying attention to the little things. The way her laugh echoes differently when she's been with him, not light and genuine but forced, as if she's trying so hard to pretend I'm the only one who matters. I catch her glancing at her phone, thumb hovering, face softening in ways meant only for his name. I watch the way her perfume lingers on her scarf, his aftershave mixed in beneath the floral notes. It makes my chest tighten just to stand near her, like breathing the same air is a betrayal. A few nights later, I follow her to that bar she says is just a friend's favorite spot. I keep to the shadows at first, posture slumped so my hood shields my face. My heartbeat taps out in my ears, a frantic rhythm I can't silence. I see her slipping inside with that easy smile guy I've never met, and something in my lung caves in. I swallow hard, chest hollow and raw. But I stay. I watch them through the window, shoulder to shoulder, knees brushing under the table, laughter soft and conspiratorial. My stomach twists in knots, half of me revolted, half of me desperate to see more. I'm like a moth drawn to a flame I know will burn me. When she steps outside alone to take a call, I slip in and sit at their table, mimic his lean, slide into the empty chair. The bartender gives me a once-over, raises an eyebrow, but I smile, order a whiskey on the rocks, strong, no chaser. I lean in like I belong. And I wait until her phone lights up again, that same preview, missed you today. I watch her eyes flick down. Her face flickers. Guilt? Relief? It's impossible to read. My throat is tight. I lift my glass, careful and slow, and catch her gaze in the mirror behind the bar. She spots me, whole color draining from her face. I leave without a word, slip out into the night where my car is parked. My hands still tremble as I crank the engine. I don't know exactly how I'll use what I saw. I just know I have to. She has to understand what it means to have every secret laid bare, to feel that same twist in her gut. My knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. My breath is ragged, chest pounding like a war drum. I drive home, headlights cutting through darkness, and I make myself a promise: I will take this slow. I'll collect every whisper, every glance, every fleeting moment she thinks I don't see. Then I'll make her wish she'd never betrayed me. The night air is cool against my face as I pull into the driveway. I sit in the car a moment, engine idling, and close my eyes. My heart races, but there's a calm beneath it, the steady pulse of purpose. I unclip my belt, reach into the glove box for the envelope I prepared earlier, her wedding invitation, now stained with coffee and scribbled notes mapping out times, places, names. It's the blueprint of her lies. I slip it into my jacket pocket, hide it where I'll find it when I need a reminder. Then I step out, shoulders squared, jaw set, and walk inside, ready for the first move. I didn't sleep much that night. My head was buzzing, like 1,000 mosquitoes circling my skull. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their silhouette by the bar, shoulder to shoulder, and it felt like a blade twisting in my chest. I tossed in bed, hands clenched around the sheets until my knuckles turned white. At some point, I got up and paced the living room, tracing cracks in the floorboards to channel the rage. By dawn, I had a plan, one that would lay bare her deception and force her to face it. I grabbed my laptop, logged into our shared cloud, and downloaded every odd screenshot she'd ever taken, flirtatious texts she'd sent him, midnight memes they'd exchanged, voice notes with her laughter echoing into his phone. In my trembling hand, I held a printed copy of the most damning message. Proof 1, screenshot of her text. I miss the way you look at me when you think no one's watching. I taped it to the fridge at eye level, right next to our wedding photo. It sat there, sides curled from the printer's heat, like a grotesque memory. Later, I found another proof, a photo saved in her camera roll, taken from behind a sheer curtain. In it, she was kissing him in a dark hallway, arms wrapped around his neck so tight her nails had left white crescents on his skin. I ordered it developed in matte finish, then slipped it into the album of our engagement shoot. I wrote a little note on the plain white border. Proof 2, photo from her camera roll. When you loved him. I left the album on the coffee table, spine cracked open to that frame, so she'd have to see it when she reached for her morning coffee. When she noticed, her gasp echoed through the apartment. She froze, hands suspended over her mug. I turned from the window, hands jammed in my pockets, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my ears. The morning light caught the tears on her cheeks before she blinked them away. Her eyes were glossy with regret or fear, I couldn't tell which. She stumbled over words, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Her face went pale, lip trembling, and I could almost see her pulse racing in her neck. My breath caught. Part of me wanted to drop everything and gather her in my arms, tell her I still loved her despite all of this. But that part was a whisper beneath the storm inside me. I forced myself to stay calm, to let her squirm in that silence. You've been careful, I said softly. My voice sounded strange, like I'd borrowed it from someone else. But not careful enough. My throat felt raw, and a low ache of sadness curled around my ribcage. She sank to her knees, hands pressed against the hardwood. Please, she whispered, voice cracking. I can fix this. Her shoulders shook, tears slipping down in hot trails. I saw her desperation, her guilt. It twisted something tight in my gut. I felt both heartbreak and satisfaction, guilt and rage colliding until I couldn't breathe. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my coffee. I walked over and crouched beside her. My chest was heavy, and I kept blinking to clear my vision. I slid the wedding photo down so that the taped screenshot covered part of our smiling faces. She flinched, like I'd slapped her. Her eyes were like saucers. She put a hand on the frame, trembling. I watched the span of her fingers, saw the way her knuckles whitened. It was enough proof for me, she was mine, or at least she'd been, and she'd thrown it away for him. I stood and pressed record on my phone. Not for legal reasons, but to show her how exposed she was. I let the camera roll as I walked around the apartment, showing her the evidence one by one, the texts, the photo, the note. Her sobs filled the space, each one a confession. And I felt the weight of power shift, that strange rush of being the one in control. The proofs were on display now, like trophies of betrayal. She had no words left, just tears and gasps. I ended the recording and slipped the phone into my pocket. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But I knew I was ready. I'd given her proof, and now, she'd given herself to me, completely, utterly, wronged. Now, it was time to decide what to do next. After she disappeared into the hallway, I sank onto the couch, head heavy in my hands. The apartment felt too quiet, every echo of her sobs still bouncing off the walls. My chest felt hollow, like someone had carved out the place where trust used to live. I stayed there, motionless, until the tension in my shoulders turned to a low, simmering ache. After the confrontation, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The air in the apartment felt heavy, each breath dragging through tension like thick syrup. I watched her curled on the floor, knees drawn up, shoulders shaking. Her tears pooled on the hardwood, and I noticed how small she looked under that harsh morning light. My heart clenched, tight and pulsing, half with regret, half with anger. I stood there, chest hollow, jaw locked, unable to move or speak. The silence stretched, a living thing pulsing between us. Then I took a slow step forward, each movement deliberate, as if I'd planned this moment in my head 1,000 times. My fingertips brushed against her arm, and she flinched, eyes wide, gaze flickering up to mine. I knelt beside her, feeling a splinter of guilt jab at my ribs. "I know you thought you could hide everything," I said, voice low and rough, like gravel rolling in my throat. She shook her head, lips trembling. "I was scared," she croaked. "I didn't mean to hurt you." My stomach twisted, a coil of nausea and sorrow. I could taste her fear, heavy and pungent, like stale smoke clinging to my clothes. She reached out, hands shaking as she aimed to touch my face. I jerked back, heart thudding. Her knuckles brushed my shirt before she drew her hand away, collapsing against her arms. I looked away, gaze drifting to the evidence on the fridge and in the album. They felt like lighthouses guiding me toward a decision I couldn't escape. My pulse hammered as I drew in a shaky breath. I needed more control, a way to make her truly understand how it felt to be exposed. So I gave her a choice, voice steady now, though my hands were slick with sweat. "You can stay and face what you've done, and try to make it right, or you can leave and never look back." She lifted her head, eyes red and swollen. Her lower lip quivered, and she swallowed, wrist twisting as if unsaid words were lodged in her throat. The room felt too small, every breath too loud. She stood, knees wobbling, and I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. Then she shook her head, voice flat with defeat. "I need to leave," she said. My chest hollowed as if someone had punched me there. I nodded, arms heavy at my sides, throat thick with grief. She turned toward the door, coat draped over her shoulder. Her steps were slow, like she was wading through something too heavy to carry. I watched until her figure slipped into the hallway, then exhaled, slow and empty. In the days that followed, I moved through the apartment like a ghost, collecting details as if assembling evidence for myself. I traced her footsteps in call logs, noted the hours she spent on his messages, counted the times she laughed in voice notes. I studied his social media, bookmarked photos where they stood too close, smiles too easy. My hands recorded every slip, every sign of their affair. It wasn't for proof anymore, but for control, a ledger of their betrayal. Each note was a step toward the revenge I'd wrought in my mind. Some nights, I lay awake watching the ceiling, body tense and bones aching as if I'd wrestled darkness itself. My heart burned with purpose, a fire that kept the tears at bay. When morning came, I drafted the first of many messages to him. I wouldn't beg or plead. I'd tell him exactly what he'd taken and what I'd planned for both of them. It would be personal, unrelenting, and absolute. And then, I paused and hit delete. I realized revenge didn't have to explode at once. It could be a slow burn, each revelation a spark until everything collapsed in flames. So I stored that draft, and I waited. Her absence left an echo I couldn't shake, and at night I found myself walking through empty rooms, fingertips brushing dust on shelves we once filled with memories. Each step felt weighted, like my bones had been hollowed out and replaced with lead. I caught myself reaching for her in the kitchen, then flinching when the chair sat empty, the coffee she loved growing cold on the counter, forgotten. I fixated on the smallest details, tracing her scent faintly lingering in corners, a reminder of everything I lost. Sometimes I'd hear her laugh echo in my mind, warm and familiar, and my chest would seize up in a mix of longing and anger. It was like holding onto a ghost that cut me every time I embraced it, a pain as intimate as a heartbeat. I decided to leave traces of her betrayal in places that mattered most. I rewatched pages of her journal online, reading her words until they felt like scars beneath my skin. My fists would clench around my phone as I scrolled through old selfies, noting the way she smiled at him, not at me. Each photo became a dagger I carried wherever I went. The revenge I plotted wasn't explosive. It was slow, deliberate, like watching ice crack. I started by sending anonymous letters to her workplace, hinting at indiscretions. My hands shook as I slipped each envelope into the mail slot, imagining the tightening in her chest when she saw the familiar handwriting, hers, traced over the paper I'd kept from our wedding vows. I watched the news on her face when she read them, murmurs of confusion turning to panic, eyes darting like a trapped animal. I felt a flicker of pity, instantly drowned by satisfaction. Seeing her unravel, like threads pulled from a tapestry, filled me with a dark thrill. I could almost taste her fear, bitter and sharp, lingering on my tongue. Every move she made felt under a microscope. I'd sit nearby, pretending to read, watching the tremble in her hands as she reached for her phone. The subtle flinch when she heard a notification, it was like watching a cornered animal, always aware of the danger closing in. And I wanted her to feel it every second until she couldn't stand it. I found myself drifting into darker thoughts, imagining her heart hammering in her chest, feeling alone and exposed. It was a cruel desire, but it drove me. My sleep grew more fitful, nightmares of her betrayal replaying on an endless loop. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, breath rattling in my throat, heart slamming against my ribs. Then, one morning, I realized I didn't want to hurt her physically. I wanted her to unravel emotionally, to taste the isolation she'd forced me into. So I withdrew the letters, stamped them undeliverable, to make her question reality. Each returned letter was a victory, a whisper that her world was breaking down just as mine had. Her emails flooded my inbox, pleas for answers, promises to change, apologies thick with guilt. I let them sit unread, the unread count climbing like a scoreboard of her desperation. When she called, I didn't answer. I'd stare at her name, hand hovering over decline, then swipe away without a second thought. I began planning the final move. Not a spectacle, but a quiet collapse where she'd realize everyone she trusted had stepped back. I drafted a message that would disappear on send, sent to her entire contact list with just 2 words, everyone knows. I rehearsed the feeling of her phone lighting up with replies, shock, betrayal, suspicion all at once. I sat at the edge of the bed, phone burning hot in my hand. My thumb hovered over send, and I could practically taste the electricity in the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought the walls would shake. My head felt foggy, like I'd woken up inside a dream that was bleeding into reality. I took a slow breath, trying to still the tremor in my voice, but it wouldn't settle. I could almost hear her pulse, the quick flutter in her throat when she saw the text go out, everyone knows. I pictured her reading it, feeling that twist of dread turn her blood to ice. The message vanished the moment it left my outbox, like a whisper lost in wind. And yet, I saw the explosions of notifications on the screen, names I'd known since childhood, colleagues from her office, even her own sister. I imagined their confusion, their side-eye glances, the slow drip of suspicion spreading through her world. My chest clenched with a fierce delight, but beneath it, there was this odd hollow ache, like I'd torn something out and couldn't quite fill the space. It was satisfying, but also unsettling. I pressed the phone against my ear, waiting for a call I was never going to take. My breath hitched when it buzzed, but I refused to answer. The idea of hearing her frantic voice, begging, apologizing, I didn't want to drown in that. Instead, I let it roll to voicemail and closed my eyes. I pictured the scene, her pacing the hallway, frantic fingers tracing the wood grain, shoulders hunched like she was trying to hold herself together. After a while, I left the bedroom and wandered into the living room. The sunlight slanted through the curtains, drawing long shadows across the floor. I sank onto the couch, legs folded under me, and watched the phone light up on the coffee table. Each ping was a small explosion in my chest. I felt like a gambler waiting for the next card to flip, the next ripple in this trap I'd built. Then, quietly, I heard her key in the door. My pulse raced as I snapped my gaze to the entryway. She stepped in, coat half on, hair a tangled mess, lips pressed into a pale line. Her eyes flicked to me, then darted to the coffee table where my phone lay like a loaded gun. Her breath hitched, soft, ragged. I could see the tremor in her shoulders. Did you send that?" she whispered, voice raw, as though each syllable was a struggle. My throat felt tight, but I kept my face neutral, like a mask I'd practiced in the mirror. "I did," I said, voice low and steady. She took a step forward, then paused, as if she wasn't sure if the ground would hold her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She trembled, and my chest clenched, half sympathy, half triumph. She sank to the floor, eyes fixed on the phone. Her hands clutched at her coat, like she was trying to anchor herself. "Please," she croaked. You don't have to do this." My heart thudded. I wanted to sweep her into my arms, whisper that it was okay, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, sharp as glass. I stood and paced the room, pressing my palms into my temples. The air felt thick, sticky with tension. I glanced back at her. Her face was pale, lips quivering, tears glistening on her cheeks. I realized then that I'd given her exactly what she needed: uncertainty, that gnawing dread of not knowing who to trust. My breath hitched at the power of it, how it turned her world upside down. I stopped and walked back to her, crouching so our eyes were level. My voice softened, though each word was laced with steel. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with it." Her shoulders shook, but she didn't look away. Her eyes were bright, raw with emotion, regret, fear, maybe a flicker of something like understanding. I stood and left her there, head bowed, surrounded by pings and buzzes that echoed through my apartment like thunder. That evening, I went out for a walk. The city lights blurred as I passed storefronts, but my mind was laser-focused. The revenge I'd started was unfolding, and I felt this strange calm woven through the storm in my chest. I knew there were more moves to make, subtle shifts in her alliances, reminders of her secrets, but for now, I let her sit in the dark, swallowed by doubt. And as I walked under the glow of street lamps, I realized something: revenge wasn't a single act. It was a journey, one I was determined to see through, no matter how many shadows I had to follow. I woke before the sun that morning, the apartment silent except for the faint hum of the heater. My head felt like it was filled with static, every thought rattling around, demanding action. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the rapid pulse beneath my palm, reminder that I was alive, and that I still had a role to play in this twisted dance. I peeled myself off the bed and moved through the rooms, each step a countdown toward the next move. I'd gathered the pieces over time: whispers from her friends, the half-laughs she'd stifle on the phone, the furtive glances she thought I missed. Now I needed one final stroke, a gesture that would shatter her fragile illusions forever. I found it tucked away in a shoebox on her shelf, the ticket stub from the show they'd snuck off to, her scrawled note on the back, promising, "Best night ever." It felt like betrayal in my hand, and I knew exactly where to use it. That afternoon, I slipped out to a cafe where she often met her sister. The barista knew my order: strong black coffee, no sugar, and slid it across the counter with a sympathetic nod. I tucked the ticket into an envelope and addressed it to her sister's home. My fingers trembled as I scribbled a brief line on the front: "Thought you'd want to know." I paused, heart hammering as if warning me away. But I pushed on, dropping it gently into the mailbox outside, listening to the soft thunk of the flag snapping closed. Later that day, I watched from across the street as her sister's car pulled into the driveway. I saw her sister pause at the mailbox, brow furrowing, hands curling around the envelope. I imagined the moment she recognized her own handwriting, the color draining from her face. I leaned against a lamppost, breathing shallow, as I pictured the family gathering unraveling, questions tossed like knives, trust splintering under the weight of new truths. That night, I waited for my phone to explode with messages, chastisements, pleas, denials. Instead, there was a single notification: her sister's name, 3 little dots as she typed, then nothing. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I forced it down. I refused to give her that release, that instant connection. I left the phone face down on the coffee table, its silence ringing louder than any alarm. I paced the living room, lamplight flickering over framed photos I'd yet to remove, smiles frozen in happier times. My chest tightened at each memory, even as satisfaction bloomed beneath the tension. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline. Somewhere deep in me, I knew this was the moment of truth: either she unraveled completely, or she wove some new defense. Either way, I'd be watching. Then I heard the key in the lock. My pulse surged, throat dry. She stepped inside, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed and wild. She didn't speak, her gaze flicked to the phone, then darted around the room as if hunting for something, answers, perhaps, or a scapegoat. I watched her back as she crossed the threshold, each hesitant step echoing in the hush I'd created. She paused near the couch, lips parted, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I felt a stab of something, pity, maybe, but it recoiled quickly, replaced by resolve. I met her eyes and nodded toward the envelope sprawled on the coffee table. She edged closer, trembling hand lifting to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed the paper, I saw her inhale sharply, as though the truth hit her like a physical blow. She looked up at me, voice cracking before she could speak anything coherent. I held her gaze, letting the silence fill the space between us. Finally, she whispered, "Why?" My chest felt hollow, and yet I found my voice steady. "Because you needed to know," I said. "Because trust isn't mine to keep when it's been given away." Her shoulders sagged as if the world had tilted beneath her feet. She sank to the couch, eyes fixed on the envelope, and I saw the fight drain out of her. My heart hammered with conflicting emotions, victory, sorrow, a raw ache that pulsed through my bones. I realized then that revenge wasn't a single moment of triumph. It was a slow collapse, a series of fractures until nothing remained but truth and consequence. I watched her there, head bowed, and understood that this was far from over. But for the first time, I felt the weight shift off my chest, just a little. The path ahead was still dark, still filled with shadows we'd cast ourselves. Yet I knew one thing with certainty: we were bound now by the ruins of what we'd built, and there was no turning back. I didn't sleep after that moment in the living room. My mind replayed every detail, the way her fingers trembled over the envelope, the hollow look in her eyes when she whispered, "Why?" I lay in the darkness, chest tight as if someone had squeezed my lungs, and listened to my heartbeat hammer against my ribs. I felt detached from my body, like I was floating beside myself and watching a show I couldn't control. When daylight finally crept through the curtains, I pulled myself up, body heavy with exhaustion. I moved through the apartment on autopilot, each step echoing in rooms that felt too familiar and too damaged. I grabbed a glass of water but barely tasted it, the cold liquid felt like betrayal slipping down my throat. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the glass, and I wondered if this was what surrender felt like, an overwhelming fatigue that seeped into every corner of your bones. I knew I couldn't let it end there. I still had secrets to reveal, corners to darken, and every piece of her world to rattle. I sat at the desk, opened a fresh document, and began to write. Not a message, but a letter she'd never see, my own confession of what I'd done, how I'd orchestrated this unraveling. I typed slowly, each word a confession and a vow: "You will carry this weight." My breath hitched as memories of each step flickered through my mind like flash frames in a film reel. I printed the letter, folded it into thirds, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. My heart hammered as I slid on my shoes. I had one more place to go, the bar where I'd first spied them together. I hadn't been back since that night. The memory of their silhouettes in that low light still gave me shivers that crawled up my spine. I stepped out, jacket collar turned up, and walked the streets with careful strides until I reached the familiar neon glow. The bar was half empty, the sticky scent of spilled beer hanging in the air. I found a corner table where nobody could see me, and I sat with my back to the wall. My pulse was loud in my ears, and I felt every muscle coiled tight, as if I were ready to strike. I pulled out the envelope with my hidden confession letter, undid the seal, and slipped it under the stack of napkins on the table. A quick, invisible placement, something she'd discover next time she came here. I watched the bartender polish glasses, listening to the scrape of metal and the hum of conversation drifting around me. My fingers brushed the envelope in my pocket, and I felt a rush of something dark and electric. It wasn't enough to send her spiraling once. I needed to create that creeping doubt that there was no safe space left. That every place she went would hold a piece of her guilt, waiting to pierce her. After I left, I circled back home and checked her routes on the shared map we used once. I traced her regular stops: the gym, the coffee shop, the bus stop she always caught in the morning. I made mental notes where I could slip in more reminders, anonymously posted flyers, a dropped USB stick with audio of their laughter, a stray photo stuck on a bulletin board. The possibilities felt endless, like a web I could spin until she was trapped in her own fear. Back in my apartment, I paced the hallway, every step echoing like a heartbeat. My chest burned with anticipation and something that almost felt like regret. I knew this path wasn't healing, it was vengeance, pure and unyielding, and I was both architect and prisoner of it. But I couldn't stop, couldn't ease the ache of betrayal that had hollowed me out. I sank onto the couch and closed my eyes, envisioning the aftermath, her eyes widening at that tucked-away letter, the flush of panic creeping up her neck, the trembling in her hands as she read lines meant to haunt. I saw her world fracturing, piece by piece, no refuge from the echoes I'd left behind. And I felt a surge of grim satisfaction, sharper than any closure. Then I realized I needed rest. Even Avengers need sleep, somehow. My phone buzzed with her name in my mind, but I didn't check it. Instead, I lay back, blanket tucked around my shoulders, and stared at the ceiling. My heart still thudded, but beneath it was a steady pulse of purpose. Tomorrow, I'd find new angles, fresh turns in this labyrinth of payback. But for now, I would let my mind rest on the precipice I'd built, knowing the fall would be hers alone. I spent the next morning hovering by my laptop like a hawk, watching as an anonymous email I'd sent to her manager landed in his inbox. I used a burner address, something innocuous that wouldn't tie back to me. The subject line was simple: concerns about misconduct. Inside, I laid out half-truths with enough detail to spark questions, mentions of unexplained absences, personal calls during work hours, hints at favoritism for a special someone. My heart hammered as I hit send, and I felt an immediate surge, like I'd siphoned power straight from her panic. It wasn't long before whispers started. I saw her profile picture in my head, her shoulders stiff, lips pressed in a tight line, when I imagined her reading that message. I pictured her phone lighting up with notifications, from HR, from coworkers, even from the receptionist asking to have a word. I paced my apartment, fingers drumming on the table, listening for the ping, the ding, any sign that it worked. I didn't need proof yet, doubt alone would do its damage. By midday, I got a glimpse of the fallout. A forwarded email landed in my burner inbox. Someone in the chain had replied, asking her to explain what special someone had to do with her project deadlines. I smiled, chest tightening with a mix of triumph and guilt. But I pushed the guilt aside, like a stone in my shoe. This was the point, letting her world spin on that axis of uncertainty I'd created. Later, I decided to visit a cafe she frequented after work. I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked the route she often took, timing myself. I wanted to be there before her, to witness her reaction. When she arrived, she looked around wildly, eyes scanning for a friendly face or a safe corner. I watched from a booth near the window, coffee cooling untouched as I observed her shrink into the seat, phone clutched like a lifeline. She opened her messages, thumb scrolling, and I saw the tension ripple across her face, jaw clenched, shoulders hunched, like she was bracing herself for bad news. I knew I had to keep the pressure building, so I stood up as if to leave, then paused. I set my cup down, hesitated, and turned back. I dropped a plain white envelope on an empty table next to her. "Forgot this," I muttered under my breath so she'd hear it, and walked away before she could respond. My pace was brisk, but inside I felt like I was floating, euphoria and dread tangled in my chest. That envelope contained a single page, a printout of screen captures from her work chat, timestamps circled, messages highlighted. Enough to raise eyebrows but leaving key details vague. When she opened it, I saw her lips part, hands trembling as she dug through her purse for her phone. I ducked around the corner, heart pounding, and peeked through the glass to watch her. She flipped the paper over, then stared at the blank side, like she was searching for a hidden message. I felt the heat in my face, a rush of adrenaline that blurred my vision. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard her knock at my door. I didn't answer. I could imagine her voice, strained and breathless. "Why are you doing this?" My mind raced with possible replies. But I stayed silent, the darkness thicker than any words I could muster. Her footsteps retreated, and I pressed my back against the headboard, chest tight with victory and a strange emptiness. The next day, I moved my focus to her social circle. I created a private group chat with a few of her closest friends, anonymous, untraceable, and fed them seeds of doubt. I posted innocently framed questions. Have you noticed her distance lately? Is she okay? Heard rumors. The responses trickled in: confusion, concern, shock. I watched their conversation unfold, each line a drop of poison in her support network. All the while, I felt the walls of my own world closing in. I realized I was spiraling as much as she was. My hands shook nightly as I plotted the next step. I questioned if I'd gone too far, if I'd become as cruel as the betrayal I'd suffered. But when her friend asked, "Are you sure it's real?" I felt that old knot of anger ignite. Because yes, it was real. And she needed to feel it, in every breath, every glance, every corner of her life. By the time I closed my laptop that evening, my eyes were gritty with exhaustion. I leaned back, tracing the outline of the screen's glow on the ceiling. I knew there were at least 5 more moves I could make, each one sharper and more personal. But for now, I let her unravel in the silence I'd constructed around her. And as darkness settled, I realized I was just as trapped by this labyrinth of revenge as she was. Yet I couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until every question in her mind had an answer she'd never forget. I woke that morning with my jaw sore from clenching it all night. The apartment felt too quiet, each creak in the floorboards echoing like an accusation. I rolled out of bed, every muscle stiff, and headed straight for the espresso machine. The bitter steam burned my lungs, jolting me awake enough to remember where I was and what I'd set in motion. I paced the kitchen, hands shoved in my pockets, feeling the rough texture of crumpled sticky note fragments I'd saved. Each one carried a fragment of her unraveling. "You lied, no one trusts you." I smoothed my palms against the countertop, trying to steady the tremor in my fingertips. The notes had done their work, her world was fraying at the edges, but I needed more. The knots of doubt had to tighten until she couldn't breathe without remembering what she'd done. Later, I slipped out and followed her usual tram route, standing behind at a safe distance. Her shoulders hunched, head down, she seemed smaller, like the weight of judgment was pressing her into herself. My heartbeat pounded so loud I was sure she could hear it if she turned around. I kept my pace, matching her stops, noting how she glanced at empty seats before settling into one at the window. I watched her fingernails tap the armrest, restless, as if waiting for another blow to land. When she stepped off, I stayed on board and rode one extra stop, then doubled back to intercept her near the tram shelter. I wore a neutral expression, same coat, same hat, to blend in. As she checked her phone, I dropped a small packet at her feet without looking. I heard it land with a soft rustle against the stone. My pulse surged. She looked down, startled, and bent to pick it up. I backed away into the crowd, watching her unfold the tissue-thin paper inside. I wanted to see her face tighten as she read my single line, "It never stops." She froze, shoulders budging as though to shrink inward. Her phone slipped through her fingers, clattering on the platform. I felt a cruel thrill at the sight, her vulnerability laid bare for strangers to witness. Then I slipped away, heart hammering, and blended into the flow of commuters. Back home, I opened my laptop and drafted another anonymous email, this time to her closest friend. I wrote in a hesitant tone, full of concern, "I'm really worried about her lately, she's not herself." I signed it as someone who cared deeply, planting seeds of looking out for her in the friend's mind. I paused before hitting send, imagining my own words echoing back to me. Would it feel like kindness or manipulation? I deleted the signature, leaving just the worry. Then I sent it. My stomach twisted when the reply came, "Who is this? Are you serious?" I let it sit for hours before responding, stoking the friend's uncertainty without revealing anything concrete. Watching the doubt spread through that friendship felt like a spider weaving its web around her, tightening until escape was impossible. That evening, I found myself at a bookstore where she often browsed. I slipped a bookmarked note between the pages of a novel she'd loved, her initials still scrawled on the title page. The note read, "Remember your promises." It was a whisper from the past, a reminder of the vows she'd broken. I watched the clerk ring up my purchase, heart pounding, convinced I looked like any other customer buying a paperback. I slipped out, coat collar turned up, and disappeared into the dusk. When I got home, my phone buzzed with messages from her, fractured apologies, frantic questions, pleading confessions. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over read, and then swiped it away. I put the phone face down and let the unanswered pings stack up. The silence felt like victory, like the calm after a storm had passed, only the storm wasn't over yet. I sank onto the couch, muscles unspooling from tension. My mind swirled with possibilities for the next steps. A photograph slipped under her door, a whispered warning at her gym, another anonymous post on social media. Each move was a thread in the web I refused to let her out of. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the stubble on my cheek scratch my palm. The ache in my chest pulsed with purpose, mingling sorrow and satisfaction until I couldn't tell which was which. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, tasting the sharp edge of resolve. This web I'd spun around her life was tightening, and I was both architect and executioner. There'd be more echoes of doubt, more reminders of betrayal, until every place she turned held a trace of me. And when she finally understood the full weight of what she'd done, I'd know, I'd truly won. I found myself staring at the ceiling for hours, heart thudding so loud I was sure the walls would shake. My chest felt like a drum beating out warnings I couldn't ignore. I traced the pattern of the cracks above me, imagining each line as a path she'd taken away from me, every detour, every secret step. My hands were clammy, and I rubbed my palms against my jeans until the fabric bit into my skin. Eventually, I slid out of bed, joints stiff, mind buzzing with possibilities. There was still work left to do, layers of her world left to peel back. I needed to make sure she couldn't find refuge anywhere. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through her social media, pretending to be her. I studied her posts and comments, the little jokes she shared, the friends she tagged. I noted which photos got the most likes, where she felt proud, where she sought approval. That would be my next move. I spent the morning drafting up friendly comment on one of her most cherished pictures, her solo shot on a hiking trail, arms outstretched against a sunset. My fingertips hovered over the keys as I wrote, "Beautiful view. Too bad you can't share it with someone who truly cares." I paused, chest clenched, throat tight. Would that sting enough? Was it subtle? I deleted it. I needed more impact. I rephrased, "Amazing shot. Reminds me of someone who loved you more than you knew." That felt sharper. I hit post and watched the three little dots spin for a heartbeat before the comment appeared. My breath caught, and I hid my phone in my pocket. Already, I could imagine her scroll stopping, eyes stinging as she read it. I pictured the confusion, the doubt creeping in, who would say that? And the slow realization it was coming from me. I stood up, shaking, and paced the floor. My heart raced with a strange excitement, but beneath it was the ache of something I couldn't name. Revenge felt sweet, but it also felt empty, like drinking water that burned. That afternoon, I took a detour on my way home and stopped by her gym. I'd slipped into the women's locker room before, under the guise of a new member. Today, I carried a small stack of sticky notes and a pen. My hands trembled as I wrote brief messages. "You lied, no one trusts you, who will stand by your side?" I peeled off a note and pressed it to the mirror above a row of sinks, then slipped around the corner and stuck another to a locker door. Each one felt like a whisper in her ear, personal, invasive. I lingered long enough to see a few women glance at the notes, their brows knitting in concern. A trainer paused mid-squat, reading one aloud. I felt a pang, imagining her shame floating through that room, strangers' eyes flickering to the notes and to her. I slipped out before she arrived, heart pounding, throat raw. My lungs ached from holding my breath, and when I exhaled on the street, I felt a tremor ripple through me, as if the world itself was shaking off the weight of what I'd done. Back in my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, wrapping my arms around my knees. My head throbbed, and I thought I might cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was just a hollow ache, a void where my hurt had been. I closed my eyes and replayed every step I'd taken, the message to her sister, the notes at the gym, the post on social media. Each felt like a piece of mosaic sliding into place, until her entire life was painted with doubt and suspicion. My phone buzzed with alerts, likes on my comment, questions from her friends on group chats. I watched notifications spill in, each one a tiny explosion. I felt the power of it, how a few words could ripple outward, touching everyone she knew. And yet I wondered, would this be enough? Would it shatter her completely, or would she find a way to fight back, rebuild her world around me? The thought made my chest tighten. I realized how far I'd come from the man who once believed in her promises. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The evening light was soft, indifferent. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the cool surface under my fingers. My reflection wavered, and I stared at myself, eyes hollow, mouth set in a grim line. I felt a knot in my throat, a swirl of regret and resolve. Revenge had consumed me, warped me, and yet I couldn't step away. Not until every mirror she faced, every space she entered, carried a reminder of what she'd done. I drew a shaky breath and turned from the window. There was more to do tomorrow, a whispered rumor at her workplace, an anonymous email to a mutual friend, another hint dropped in a place she considered safe. I clenched my fists, feeling the pulse in my veins, and whispered into the stillness, "This ends when you can't look away." Then I set to planning, letting the darkness settle around me as I mapped the next chapter in this endless unfolding of betrayal and revenge. I woke to a low, persistent hum of regret buzzing through my veins. My throat felt tight, as though I'd swallowed a fist overnight. I rolled out of bed, legs heavy, and stared at the envelope still tucked into my jacket pocket, the final piece of evidence I'd sworn to release. My jaw ached from clenching, and my chest tightened with a knot of anticipation and something that might have been sorrow. I showered, water warm against my skin but never hot enough to wash away what I'd done. Steam fogged the mirror, and I caught a glimpse of my own eyes, dark, hollow, fixed on a future built from fragments of her lies. I wondered briefly who I was anymore, the man who trusted without question, or the one who now measured every breath by its capacity to betray. I knew the next move had to be decisive. I'd collected whispers and notes, photos and recordings, but now I needed something unmistakable, something that would shatter whatever remained of her fragile confidence. I slid the envelope from my pocket. Inside was a flash drive, labeled simply, Memories. It contained a single video file, shot with my own hands, a montage of her laughter and his touch, set against the soundtrack of her own voice confessing love in midnight whispers. I'd held back until now, saving it for the moment when her world stood on the edge of collapse. That afternoon, I made my way to the community center where her book club met. I'd been there before, once or twice, under the guise of returning a dropped notebook. Today I carried a small postal package, weighty with intention. I dropped it at the reception desk, asked a casual question about meeting times, then slipped away before curiosity fully took hold. My heart pounded like a warning drum, and I breathed through my shirt to steady the tremor in my chest. By evening, I sat on my couch, hands drumming on my knees, waiting for the first ripple of panic. My phone didn't ring, at first. Then a text popped up, her sister's name, 3 dots dancing as she typed, then gone. My breath hitched. Minutes later, a flurry of social media tags appeared, mutual friends sharing a broken link, puzzled comments, whispers of, "Is this real?" My chest tightened so much I thought I might collapse, but I let the tension ride, filling every hollow with purpose. I poured myself a drink, whiskey neat, and held the glass like a lifeline. My hands shook, and I brought it to my lips slowly, tasting the fire and regret in equal measure. Around me, the apartment felt too quiet, walls closing in on the absence of her footsteps. I realized then that I'd set a trap with no clear way out for either of us. Later, I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart thundered as I opened it just enough to see her silhouette. She stood there, coat barely on, cheeks streaked with tears, eyes red and raw. She didn't speak, just handed me her phone. Screen cracked, video thumbnail blurred under fingerprints. Her voice was a whisper, "Why?" My throat went dry. I could feel the weight of her stare, a judging flame that pierced straight through me. I glanced at the video playing behind her watery gaze. There we were, her and him, spun in a private world of stolen moments. I'd given her the power to destroy or to forgive. My chest heaved with a strange ache, equal parts triumph and guilt. I met her eyes and swallowed hard. "Because you needed to understand," I said, voice low, shaking like a leaf caught in a storm. I could feel the tremor of my own conviction. She stepped inside, head bowed, and let the door click shut behind her. The room felt suffocating, charged with every secret I'd set free. She dropped the phone on the table and sank onto the couch, shoulders hunched, tears slipping free. I hovered, unsure whether to close the distance or step back into the shadows I'd always hidden in. In that heavy moment, I realized revenge wasn't a single act but a transformation, of us both. The man who sought to punish had become the man haunted by his own fury. I knelt beside her, heart pounding louder than her sobs, and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her skin was cold, trembling under my palm, and instinctively I wanted to comfort her. Instead, I whispered, "It ends when we can't lie to ourselves anymore." Her head lifted, eyes searching mine, filled with broken pieces of hope and despair. We sat in silence as the video's echoes faded, two strangers bound by a path we'd carved together. And in that hush, I understood the final truth. There is no victory in revenge, only the hollow echo of what we've lost, and what we might yet become. I woke to the dull ache behind my eyes, like gravity had settled into my skull overnight. My body felt leaden, every joint stiff as if I'd lain on concrete. I rolled out of bed, shoulders tight, and stood in the gloom, hands tangled in my shirt. I could still taste the bitterness of the whiskey from the bar, the sting of every confession I'd scattered like breadcrumbs through her life. My chest felt hollow, but beneath it, something pulsed, a restless need to watch her world fracture one piece at a time. I showered quickly, water scalding against my skin, trying to wash away the knot of guilt and triumph braided in my veins. Steam blurred the mirror, and I stared at my reflection, eyes shadowed, face drawn. I wondered who I'd become, the man who once trusted without question, or the one who now thrived on her every tremor. Later, I made my way to the art studio where her closest friend took evening classes. I'd scoped the schedule online, anonymously, of course, and slipped inside just as the door clicked behind me. The room smelled of paint and turpentine, a heady mix that made my lungs tighten. I clutched a slim folder under my arm, heart thumping so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I followed her friend's voice through the low hum of brushes, and saw her bent over a canvas, arms speckled with color, hair pulled back in a loose bun. I slid the folder onto an empty table nearby, then lingered in shadow. In it were photographs I'd taken of her and the other man, ones she'd never suspect I had. In some, they were almost tender, in others, frank. Enough to wreck any trust between them and the people who mattered. I watched her friend straighten at a shout from the instructor, knock the folder with her elbow, and pause. Her expression flickered from curiosity to confusion. I held my breath and slipped away before she dared open it. Back on the street, I pressed my head against the cool brick of the building, chest heaving. The thrill was sharp, like a blade pressed between my ribs. I could almost hear my own blood pounding, like a warning, or a promise. I slipped the rest of my printed evidence into a backpack, planning to leave similar folders in places she trusted, her gym locker, the cafe, maybe even the lobby of her apartment building. That evening, I settled onto my couch, legs curled beneath me, and lit a single lamp. The soft yellow glow cast long shadows that danced on the walls, like echoes of the doubt I'd sown. My phone buzzed with frantic voice messages from her, pleas, accusations, half-formed apologies. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the rapid thrum beneath my fingertips. Each ping was a pulse of power, but also a reminder of the gulf between us. I typed one word into a blank message, stop. Then I deleted it. I couldn't offer her any release, not yet. Instead, I drafted a 2-sentence note to her mother. "I've shared everything. I'm sorry it had to come to this." I signed it with her name, so it felt like a final betrayal, one more fracture. I downloaded it as a PDF, added it to the folder I'd already planned to mail, and set it to send first thing tomorrow. My hands shook as I closed my laptop and pressed my forehead to the cool wood of the coffee table. I felt dizzy, as if I'd climbed a mountain of my own making. I questioned each step. Was this cruelty or justice? But the doubt slid away when I pictured her waking to that email, her mother's voice catching on the phone when she asked, "Why?" The weight of that moment would be heavier than any blade. Sleep eluded me, so I paced the apartment in the early hours, eyes stinging, body humming with tension. I stopped at the window and looked out at the silent street, lamplight pooling on the pavement. My reflection wavered in the glass, hollow-eyed, determined. I realized that revenge was no longer a series of moves, it was become my world. And I was trapped in it as much as she was. I pressed my hand to the glass, body taut, and whispered to the stillness, "This ends when the last secret is mine to keep." Then I turned away, heart still drumming, and braced myself for the fallout I'd engineered, knowing full well that once this final wave of evidence hit her life, there'd be no going back for either of us. That morning, I woke while the apartment was still cloaked in shadows. My chest felt tight, as if someone had pressed a hand to my ribcage and wouldn't let go. I slid out of bed, muscles stiff and jaw sore from clenching through the night. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, hundreds of unread messages blinking in the dark. Each ping felt like a summons to face what I'd done. I stared at the screen, throat dry, and swallowed hard against the lump forming there. Then I closed my eyes, took a ragged breath, and forced myself to move. I made coffee strong enough to cut through steel, hands gripping the mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. Steam curled into the air, warm against my face, reminding me of all the times I'd watched her do the same, sunlight catching her hair, laughter loose on her lips. That memory shoved at me from behind, guilt swelling as I took a sip and almost tasted regret. But under it all was something fiercer than remorse, a cold resolve that beat against my heart like a war drum. I set the mug down and let the tremor in my hands settle as best it could. I crossed the living room and paused by the entry table, where the last envelope waited, sealed with my confession and her future. I picked it up and felt its weight like a verdict. I'd spent weeks orchestrating every whisper, every note, every doubt. Now, this final move would finish the reckoning. My pulse surged at the memory of her face when she first saw the evidence, how betrayal struck her like a bullet that refused to exit. I closed my fist around the envelope and slipped it into my coat pocket, as though I were hiding away a blade. Later, I found her waiting in the lobby, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed red. She didn't look at me at first, just stared at the envelope on the table between us, as if it were a dying thing. My throat burned when I spoke, voice low and unsteady, "This is it." She lifted her gaze then, mouth parting, tears glistening in her lashes. Her arms curled around herself, chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Don't." Guilt spiked through me, a hot knife twisting deeper than any plan I'd made. I inhaled, feeling the weight of every secret we'd shared, every moment she'd stolen. "I have to," I said, though each word scraped against my ribs. I sat a few feet away, letting the space between us shiver with tension. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope, drawing it closer like it might burn her. I watched each flinch, each fold of her skin, as if committing it to memory. She opened it with shaking hands, edges of paper curling under her touch. I saw her eyes flick to my confession inside, to the flash drive labeled memories, and then back to me. Her lips quivered as she swallowed, and I realized this was the moment our lives would diverge. The quiet stretched until it felt like a living thing, pulsing with the weight of all we'd unleashed. She didn't speak. Instead, she slipped the drive from the envelope and held it out to me, as if offering the last piece of herself. My breath caught. I rose and took it, fingers brushing hers, cold, fragile, and broken. I felt her leap of desperation against my palm, then falter into stillness. I turned the drive over in my hand, watching the silver surface catch the lobby's dim glow, and I knew there was no going back. I tucked it into my pocket and met her gaze, my own eyes heavy. "It ends now," I said softly, though my voice shook. She nodded once, shoulders sagging, and exhaled like someone drowning on dry land. As she stood, I felt the emptiness settle around me, an echo of everything we'd destroyed. Outside, the sky was pale, the world already waking. We stepped through the doors side by side, but as soon as we hit the street, she veered away, coat collar pulled up, head bowed. I watched her retreat, a solitary figure dissolving into the morning crowd. My heart hammered with both relief and sorrow, and I let the silence roll through me like distant thunder. I turned back toward the building, each footstep steady and deliberate. The path ahead stretched out, uncharted and daunting. I'd won my revenge, but at the cost of us both. My chest ached with the paradox of triumph and loss. Yet beneath the pain was a flicker of something like hope, hope that one day, I might rebuild what betrayal had torn apart, or at least forgive myself for the part I'd played. As I walked away, I kept my hand on the pocket where the flash drive rested, a final reminder that some truths, once set free, can never be reabsorbed. And in that lingering weight, I found a strange comfort, the honesty of pain, unvarnished and raw, lighting the way through whatever came next.